Hello, welcome back to the Peaceful Creatives podcast. So happy to be back with another episode, and today I am talking about almost like a little shift in perspective for how you view your business. Because one of the biggest questions I get from clients, one of the biggest things that I talk about is how do you get consistent inquiries? And obviously this feels like such a big issue because inside a creative service business, it feels like what is going to happen is you get a consistent level of inquiries into the business, and that means that you can then have a consistent level of projects booked into the business. And that makes sense, inquiries make projects, make clients, all of that sort of thing. But what I would love to share with you today is what we can actually do instead of trying to force consistent inquiries is utilize the demand that we get into our business naturally to actually build a booked up schedule of consistent projects in itself. This is what I have been doing in my business for years and years now. I noticed very early on that what I found in the business is there were like fluctuations and seasons across the year of busier versus quieter periods. And it felt like that was always going to create this cycle of busier and quieter periods in projects as well. And that is exactly what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about how it doesn't actually matter if you find that your inquiries are inconsistent. I want to talk about how you know if you have enough demand in your business to get booked up. And I want to talk about a few ways that you can actually create enough demand in the business without stressing yourself out, without forcing more marketing, and without being absolutely everywhere. So the first thing is to give a little bit of an overview around how inquiries tend to come into the business. And the first thing to know is that often it depends on who it is you want to work with. If you have a really, really clear idea of the types of businesses, the types of people, the types of clients that you want to pull into the business. And if you have started to speak to those people in your marketing, if you understand their dilemmas, if you talk to the transformations that they're looking for, you will find that even still, there will be seasonality there. And that is because certain types of people, certain types of businesses go through those seasons in their lives, in their businesses as well. A really, really good example here is working with e-commerce businesses. Those businesses tend to want their projects for their busy seasons. So for Black Friday, for Christmas, for spring or summer sales, if they're looking for photographers for certain product lines, if they're looking for web designers, if they're looking for brand refreshes, they are likely to want those things to happen inside their quiet periods, ready for when sales and customers pick up. That is a bit of an easier one to pick on. Another one is if you work in the wedding industry, often you are then thinking about when people tend to get engaged, when people start planning weddings, the time frame between an actual ceremony, an actual wedding day, and when people tend to get in touch with you. All of these different things create different seasonality, create different trends in when you are more likely to hear from those people. And whatever it is that you do, whoever it is you serve, whoever you are speaking to, you will find that there are different trends and different seasons for you as well. Me, for example, I tend to work with a lot of female business owners, usually in the service industry or service adjacent. And so I tend to get that kind of back to school energy of the beginning of the year and around September for an increase in inquiries. I tend to find my quieter seasons are throughout the summer when people are easing off a little bit or not necessarily thinking about a project, and also right at the end of the year when, again, people are slowing down a little bit. Me acknowledging and seeing those trends in my own business, which, by the way, if I think back, I was not thinking this way back then, but if I think back to the first couple of years in my business, I probably could have identified those trends then and seen that pattern then repeated itself throughout the years and years that I have run my business since. And that information could have been really, really crucial for working through things like feast and famine cycles and worrying much less about consistent inquiries and focusing more on consistent bookings. So cast your own mind back, think about your business. If you have been in business for less than a year, it's a little bit trickier to do this, but you can do it by thinking about who your people are. If you have been in business for longer than a year, a few years, even up to 10 years or more, like most of the people who I tend to work with are, then you can have a think about when you find that people get in touch the most, and have a think about those patterns in relation to the people that you tend to work with. Why might your people be getting in touch in April or in August or around Christmas? Why might those be the common periods for people to be getting in touch with you and trying to book a project? So then moving on to looking at this in a little bit more detail, if we know that all we need is a level of demand in the business, and it doesn't necessarily matter when that demand is, how do you know that you're getting enough demand, and how do you then spread that demand out across the year so you can be booked up much more consistently and steadily, even though you're not getting those consistent inquiries? So let's answer the first question first. How do you know that you are getting enough demand in those busier periods to spread across, let's say, months or even a full year of work? So we can really easily work out our capacity by figuring out how many people we want to work with at a time, how long our services last in terms of weeks, and also how many weeks we want to work across the year. Working out that capacity, working out how many clients we want to work with is such a great piece of data for, yes, figuring out this sort of stuff, but also thinking about your pricing, thinking about your capacity, all of these things that can build into the strategies that I tend to talk about around getting booked up peacefully in your creative business. So let's say you want to work 48 weeks a year, your services are 8 weeks long, and you want to work with 2 clients at a time. That gives you a capacity of 12 clients a year because you have 48 weeks that you can work. Each of your services take 8 weeks, so that's squeezing in 6 consecutive projects, but then you can work with 2 clients at a time, so that doubles that capacity to 12. You now know that your capacity for an entire year is 12 projects. So all you need to make sure is that in those busier periods, you are getting at least 12 inquiries that end up being booked in. If you are a person who tends to struggle with inconsistent projects, so booking things in much busier periods and then going into quieter periods, I would love for you to think back and consider whether you actually had enough projects to cover the demand that you need to fill that capacity. And a lot of people that I work with, the answer is yes, you do tend to find that you get those 10 inquiries or at least enough to fill that capacity. Knowing that, we can then move into the next question, which is what do you then do with that demand? And that's where we want to build a really peaceful booking system to make sure those projects are being booked in a way that actually spreads them out and makes the projects consistent, even when the inquiries don't actually match that consistency. This is where the approach that I teach comes in, where you can create a really peaceful booking system that acts as almost like the foundation of your business, your project bookings, and gives you a logical, physical strategy that you can use to leverage inconsistencies and trends that we see in our business and build them into something that feels much more consistent, that builds much more steadiness, that allows you to stay consistent in the business without actually feeling like you have to force increased demand or increased inquiries at times that don't actually fit for the people that you want to work with. So let's just switch over to a follow-up question that you might be having, and that is, what if I'm not actually creating enough demand? What if I'm not actually creating enough demand to book up months of my schedule when I have those busy periods? And this is where the marketing comes in, because if you can start to identify who your people are, this is something I will talk about a million times over and over again, who your people are, what it is that they need, and why they might be getting in touch at certain times of the year, you can build that seasonality and those trends into your marketing as well. So for example, if, again, let's go back to the e-commerce client example, if you know that those people will want their brand new website by Black Friday, when is it that they need to be booking that project in with you to get that done? And how can you cover that in your marketing? Can you start talking in summer about, hey, e-commerce brands, I know you're going to want a fresh new website by Black Friday so you can increase sales, draw in the right customers. and make the most of the promotional period. If you want to do that, you need to start booking in right now so we can get that project in place. It's really a case of you understanding deeply who your people are and positioning yourself as the expert to help those people to create demand that feels natural instead of forcing your clients into an urgency that doesn't quite work for them. When you're going to find that the inquiries feel like more of a slog is when you are trying to create demand and create inquiries in periods that don't naturally fit for your clients. Because again, going back to one of the previous examples, if your client's wedding is a year away and they only start thinking about your service 6 months in advance, it's going to be much harder to force those people into getting in touch at that time instead of gently encouraging 6 months before the busy wedding season to get them to get in touch for your service. Again, with everything I talk about, it's so deeply grounded in who it is you work with, and it really is such a gift and a skill to be able to identify and connect with those people so you can actually utilize inconsistencies in your business to create more steadiness and to not rely on having to force things that are maybe less natural, like clients getting in touch when they're not quite ready to work with you or thinking about your project. I recently booked 6 months of projects into my calendar in just 6 weeks in one of those busy periods that I mentioned before that I am now very well versed on and understand really well. And I'm actually talking about how I did that, the income that I made from those projects, and the full breakdown of what that looked like in terms of inquiries, in terms of the clients, in terms of the offers, and the time that it takes in a brand new private podcast series that I'm really excited about sharing. The podcast is called 6 Months of Peaceful Bookings, and you can subscribe to the podcast completely for free. You just have to sign up to get access. And this is exactly what I'm sharing in that podcast. I'm talking about how I utilize the demand that I get in my business, the seasonality, the trends, and almost the inconsistencies to actually build consistency in my business. I'm going to break down where my clients have come from, why they wanted to work with me, how I decided who to say yes to, and actually some clients that I said no to as well, and how all of this works to build much more peace inside my business. I will drop a link to the private podcast in the description of the episode so you can head over and download that. So head over to that link if you want to get access to that private podcast. I'll be releasing 2 episodes a week over the next few weeks so you can get drip fed all the great information, listen to it in your own time. And before I wrap up, I really just want to give you a little bit of a shift, again, in terms of perspective, like I said at the beginning, for how we can still build really consistent businesses when things don't necessarily always feel consistent. I know that when I was in the early phases of my business, periods that felt really inconsistent just ended up feeling shaky for me. I felt like it was never going to work out. I felt like it was a problem that I was having, that the inquiries were inconsistent. I thought I wasn't marketing enough. I thought I wasn't saying the right things. And actually what I found is that in any business, there will always be ups and downs, highs and lows, trends and seasonalities. And actually the more that we embrace them as business owners, the more we understand the depths of our business, the more that we can plan the strategy to actually work for us, to actually feel more calm, consistent and steady, which ultimately will build a much more sustainable business. So if you are finding that things feel a little bit off, a little bit unsteady, a little bit inconsistent, really remember that you don't have to take that as a given. You don't have to run with the trends. You don't have to run with the seasonality, but you can harness those things. You can utilize those pieces in your business to actually build a strategy that works around that. You don't have to be constantly chasing the trends, chasing the almost like train of where your clients are thinking. But the more you understand, the more you get where your clients' heads are at, the more you understand what they're thinking throughout the year, the more that you can shift your marketing to actually work towards those trends and support your clients in the way that you know best. This steadiness and this consistency comes from the structure in the business, not chasing after clients and trying to guess what they need. You know deep down who your clients are, what they need from you, and what it is that they're thinking throughout these trends, throughout these seasonal periods. And I really trust that you can make this demand work for you in your business. And I know it works. I know this strategy works. And if you want more information, have a listen to that private podcast, and I'll be sharing all of the behind the scenes around how I utilize inconsistent demand to actually get booked up 6 months in advance in a really, really peaceful schedule. I'll be back next week with a brand new episode. Can't wait to speak to you then. I really hope you've enjoyed this one. And I would love if you could subscribe to my YouTube channel over at Gatto Creative Mentor. It's a piece that I'm really trying to build into the business. And you can drop me a comment over there if you want to have a chat as well. I will speak to you soon, and I hope you have such a lovely week.